All right, so I am live here today again, third time in a row, mostly on time. And today I'm going to be talking about getting a little bit deeper into AWS. I talked about some basics in the last couple weeks, and now I'm going to get into some of the details and talk about how to prepare for your first certification with AWS. This is something that happens with me quite a bit, is when I'm teaching cloud computing at a university in particular. One of the things that we do is we get into doing AWS Cloud Practitioner training. So first thing I'm going to start out with here is to get into how to use the official material, how to get started with studying for the exam, and then I'll actually go through some of the official material from AWS. All right, so I'm going to start off then with just sharing my screen, and this would be a good place to start. And if you notice this repo here, this is in GitHub. I have AWS Bootcamp. I'm going to put a bunch of stuff here, including notes on the AWS for 52 weeks podcast. And in general, this is a great place to just kind of hang out here. And to start off here, notice I have a link here that says AWS Certified Practitioner Overview. Let's go ahead and take a look at this and just walk you through some of the things that are important. This is the first level certification, the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner. And I would, again, recommend you start here, especially if you don't have experience with AWS. And who should take the exam? Pretty much anybody can take it. It takes about 90 minutes. The cost is $100. There's 65 questions, very doable. And it's really a great place to get started here. Now, if we look at the exam guide, this is one of the things that I'll bring up here that I think is really important, is to always look at the exam guide when you're studying for an AWS certification. If we look at what the exam validates, you can see that it says it explains the value of the AWS Cloud. It helps you understand and explain the AWS shared security model, also understand security best practices, understand AWS cloud costs, economics, billing processes, describe the core services of AWS, compute, network, database, storage, and then identify the right service for the scenario. And this you'll see as you get more advanced when you're using AWS, is that the services and the use case become much, much more tied in together. So again, here you can see this is the overview. There's multiple choice, there's multiple response. And then if we go down to the domains, this is always a good place to hang out a little bit, is you can go into each of the domains and see that the technology itself is the primary focus of this exam. There's some stuff on security and compliance, and there's also cloud concepts and billing. So let's go ahead and just go through some of these domains here. First up, we've got domain 1, cloud concepts. You'll need to be able to understand the benefits of cloud computing for security, reliability, high availability, elasticity, agility, pay-as-you-go pricing, scalability, global reach, economies of scale. So some of these words may seem like buzzwords, and I see this a lot when people are first learning AWS. They're like, "What is elasticity? I don't like this." Or high availability, I don't like this. This is a great opportunity to take these, put them into a document somewhere, look them up on the AWS website, and then define them yourself. And this is a great way to understand it. Also, some of the things that you'll need to know in that first domain are to identify the aspects of cloud economics, define items that you would be part of your total cost of ownership, understand the role of billing, and then also get into cloud architecture principles. So designing for failure, decoupling components versus monolithic architecture, thinking in parallelization. These are all great places to pay attention to in the first domain. The second is security and compliance. I would say probably the most important on any AWS exam is security. Even though they may say it's only a certain percentage, you'll see security questions throughout all exams. So what is the shared security model is a question that we're going to talk about in the next coming weeks. But basically, it means that AWS manages some things, you manage some things. So in particular, the data center is a great example. You don't have to have armed guards, managing a data center, physical security. You can actually offload that to AWS. And then some of the compliance things come into play. Also, how groups and users and roles play a role. And then if we get into technology, they'll ask you questions about, for example, what's an API, which is a very good thing to know about. What's an SDK? How to use the console? How to use the command line tools? what's the global infrastructure, what's the core services, and then finally, in terms of billing, you'll need to know things like what is a spot instance and how does it work, and what's on-demand pricing and how does billing work. All these kinds of things are important. And again, you can just go through here and look at the exam overview. So now that you've got the overview for Cloud Practitioner, what we can do is actually get into the official material here, and I'm going to break down this each week, and we'll just start with whatever we can cover in, let's say, 30 to 60 minutes. So first up, if I go into this first set of slides here, I'm going to go into slideshow mode, and I'm just going to talk through these slides real quick. So this particular set of material is the official documentation for AWS certifications. And in a nutshell, the general knowledge for the exam is you have to have some IT knowledge. It's preferable if you know a little bit about cloud computing. It's also preferable if you know about distributed systems and networking, but it's not required. And after you're completing this course, or basically the slides here, you should be able to define the AWS cloud, the pricing principles. You should know about IAM, also about VPC. You should know a little bit about the Elastic Compute Cloud, including Lambda and Elastic Beanstalk. I'll also go through these later. And then what is S3, EBS, EFS, and Glacier? That's a great terminology, word salad there that would confuse a lot of people unless you've gone through and you've written these definitions out for yourself. Also know about database services, including Dynamo, Redshift, and Aurora. And then make sure you know cloud architecture principles. And then know about ELB, CloudWatch, auto-scaling. So those are the things that will be covered, and I'm going to cover these over the next few weeks as Cloud Concepts Overview. That's what we'll get today. Maybe we'll get into Cloud Economics. Module 3 is Global Infrastructure. Module 4 is AWS Cloud Security. Module 5 is Networking and Content Delivery. Module 6 is Compute. Module 7, Storage. Module 8, Databases. 9, Cloud Architecture. 10, Automatic Scaling and Monitoring. All right, so the Cloud Concepts Overview, the main thing is going to be covering what is cloud computing. And then in terms of billing, it's the fundamentals of pricing, total cost ownership, AWS Organizations, billing and cost management, and then how do you get support. And 3 is global infrastructure, AWS services. Module 4, cloud security, including the shared security model that I talked about before. Networking includes what are networking basics, what is an Amazon VPC, what is VPC networking, what is VPC security, what is Route 53, and then what is Amazon CloudFront. Compute services, so what is EC2, how do you optimize cost for EC2, container services, introduction to AWS Lambda, and also introduction to AWS Elastic Beanstalk. 7, storage, Elastic Block Storage, what is it? Simple storage system, S3, what is it? Elastic File System, what is it? What's the simple storage service, Glacier? Databases, we've got Amazon RDS, we've got DynamoDB, which is our key value database. We've got Redshift, and we have Aurora. Cloud architecture, there's something that you'll hear a lot, especially amongst consulting, called the well-architected framework. We'll cover that, reliability and availability, and then AWS Trusted Advisor. Module 10 will be automatic scaling and monitoring, including ELBs or Elastic Load Balancing, Amazon CloudWatch, Amazon EC2 auto scaling. And then in terms of the exam, I talked a little bit about this, but I'll just dig into this even more here since we have the official material, is that this is the foundational certification. If you wanted to get every single certification that is offered by AWS, this is probably the first spot. And you have to know roughly around 6 months of training around AWS to pass it. You obviously can pass it much quicker if you speed through and you cram for it. Once you've got this, then the associate level is more about a year's worth of experience. So the solutions architect is really the juggernaut. You'll see this one all over the place. In fact, I think some of the numbers I've seen are anywhere between 130 to 150,000 per year. You can get paid if you have a solutions architect. So you could definitely make this the case where why even go to school? Just take the AWS Solutions Architect certification, get some experience, and you make a 6-figure salary. Personally, I think the certifications plus school is a great combination. And then there's the professional level, which is actually something I'm working on preparing some training material for now, which is really kind of the elite level certification. You have to have at least a couple years of experience doing comprehensive designing, operating, troubleshooting. So you can bet that's going to be a very difficult exam. There's other ones like operations, which is SysOps. There's DevOps, which I've also prepared material for. There's the developer associate, and then the specialties, and I have actually been involved with some of these specialties before and passed them. There's AWS machine learning specialty, there's Alexa, skill builder, there's security specialty, advanced networking, big data. So from my opinion, I think why not? If you're wanting to do a career change, set a goal for yourself to pass all of these. First though, let's get past the cloud practitioner. A few things you can mention. We already went through the official documentation, the exam guide, going through the sample questions. Once you're done, you can share it on LinkedIn, your resume. And then in terms of documentation, it is important to know you can get all the documentation from docs.aws.amazon.com. And the white papers, this is probably the Achilles heel of most people that take the exam, is they don't follow the white papers. And as a result, they don't pass the exam. Why do you want to follow white papers? Because those are the source of truth for Amazon. And if you think about how people would write an exam, they're going to go to the source of truth and then basically synthesize that information to create an exam question. So if you do not read the white papers, you will have a very difficult time pricing or passing the exams. All right, so that's probably a good place to kind of shift into the next section here, which is now let's get into some actual material. And this is a good one. We'll start off with, according to AWS, what are the cloud concepts overview. So we're going to talk about introduction to cloud computing. We'll also talk about advantages of cloud computing and introduction to Amazon Web Services, and then the cloud adoption framework. So after you complete this module, you're going to be able to know about the different kinds of cloud computing. You're going to be able to describe 6 advantages of cloud computing, recognize the main Amazon services, and then also review the CAF, or cloud adoption framework. All right, so let's get into it. What is cloud computing? And if you think about it, it's kind of an interesting question for many people. It means many different things, but in a nutshell, it's an on-demand delivery of compute, database, storage, applications, IT resources, and it's pay as you go. So you can think of it much more like a utility, like the water, or the power or trash. It's something where you pay on demand, and the more you consume, the more you pay. And these resources can be used together like building blocks to build solutions for business goals. So that's really the best analogy I would recommend, is it's a utility. So infrastructure as software, it basically allows you to quit thinking about physical infrastructure. As I mentioned before, one of the most annoying ones is actually, how do you maintain physical security, right? Like that kind of stuff just goes away because you can think of infrastructure as software. And in the traditional computing module, infrastructure is basically thought of as hardware, that you got space, staff, security, all this stuff, long-term hardware procurement. Like, for example, what if there's an outage? How do you actually go and fix it? How do you actually procure the right hardware? What if there's a shortage? What if your vendor gets in a fight with you? There's all these problems that just go away when you don't have to actually maintain the infrastructure, and you don't have to guess how much infrastructure to keep as well. Now, in terms of the cloud computing model, infrastructure as software is really a key component. And because things are now software, they're flexible, you can change more quickly, and it helps developers, IT departments differentiate between capacity planning, maintenance, procurement, and really it's a huge win for many organizations. The 3 areas of cloud service models that are the most important to consider initially are infrastructure as a service, and that's IaaS, and then there's platform as a service, PaaS, software as a service, SaaS or SaaS. You'll hear that a lot. SaaS, a good example is Gmail or Google Docs. Platform as a service is more of a hosted solution. So This would be things like Elastic Beanstalk or Google App Engine, where you're just taking some code in a framework and you're deploying it into the cloud. Infrastructure as a service, this is the building block. So this is cloud storage, cloud compute. And if you're an expert, you potentially would want to shift more towards IaaS. If you're more of a startup and you want to move quickly, you might shift more towards PaaS. Now, cloud computing deployment models, we've got cloud, we've got hybrid, and we've got on-prem, which is the private cloud. So basically a cloud-based application would be, it's fully deployed in the cloud and all the parts of the application run in the cloud, and it has every single benefit, and it's using the low-level infrastructure. A hybrid is more about connecting the infrastructure and applications and using the existing resources not located on the cloud. And so this allows organizations that want to maybe go slowly. And then on-prem is using things like virtualization, management tools. Sometimes people call this the private cloud. So there's a lot of similarities between AWS and traditional IT. And so if you see in traditional IT, and I've had to deal with these in my life, there's the firewall, there's the ACL, there's the ops people, there's the network pipe. I mean, these are actual physical devices. There's on-premise servers, there's these databases, but on AWS, it's all virtual. In fact, your entire IT department becomes a laptop, and you can see that basically you can do security groups and network ACLs and the IAM roles and Elastic Load Balancer, and compute becomes just machines that you launch in the cloud. Storage all becomes a different cloud-based virtualization. So some of the takeaways are that cloud computing is on-demand delivery of IT resources via the internet, and it's pay-as-you-go pricing. Cloud computing enables you to think about your infrastructure. There are 3 different cloud service models: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. The 3 cloud deployment models: cloud, hybrid, on-prem, or private cloud. And anything you can do, for the most part, with traditional IT, you can do on your laptop with AWS Cloud. So this is definitely a new way of thinking, and I think that's one of the big takeaways as well, is that people should be aware that the excuse of, well, we can't do that, the cloud doesn't offer it, it really, for the most part, is a bad excuse. Okay, how do you take advantages of cloud computing? In particular, one of the things you do is you trade capital expense for variable expense. So what this means is that instead of you getting a loan for $2 million, you don't need to do that. Instead, you just pay for what you use, right? So imagine if you had to buy like a power plant just to get your lights turned on. Most people wouldn't do it. Instead, we use a variable expense, which is the utility. So additionally, there's something called massive economies of scale. We see this with Walmart, we see it with Costco, because the aggregate usage from all the customers comes together. AWS can have economies of scale, and they can pass those savings on to the customer. That's why if you go to Costco and you buy something, it can be, 25% of what it is at a smaller store, because they're able to buy it in bulk and give it to you for so cheap. So the other thing that's a big problem that's solved with AWS Cloud Computing is that you don't have to guess what kind of server capacity, and this is really a nightmare. And I've actually, believe it or not, had to deal with this in my career, where you had to buy physical servers, and then the servers get too overwhelmed, and then you're stuck, right? There's nothing you can do because your physical servers are sitting there churning. Likewise, you can buy too many servers. I've also seen this problem, and then they're just sitting there idle, and then you just wasted $1 million. So the ideal scenario is that you scale according to demand. So how do we do this? Well, we can also do this by increasing the speed and the agility. And so instead of waiting for weeks for, again, like the bureaucracy of a large organization, and this really is a problem right now in America, is there's huge bureaucracies. You don't have to do any of that. You just click a button. And so that's, I think, in a way, a threat to many traditional IT departments, is that someone with a credit card can basically replace many of the things that they do and get up and running, let's say, 1,000 times faster. So what does this do? It helps you stop spending money on running and maintaining data centers. So with a data center, we got payroll for the people, and they're not cheap, right? You have utilities, you have maintenance, you have landscaping, you have hardware. All that is an investment, but instead you can focus on your business and you can focus on your customers. The other thing that's also almost impossible, I mean, there really is no way to replace this, is this idea of going global in minutes. If you see, AWS has the North Virginia region, it has Ohio, North Carolina, Northern California, Oregon, Mumbai, India, Pacific, European Union, all these locations. Just click a button, you go global in a minute. And in fact, in many cases, you have to go global because there are different data regulations in different parts of the world. For example, the European Union, you can't send data from the European Union to another region of the world. So you must do that if you're going to be working with companies in Europe. So takeaways here: you're able to trade capital expense for variable expense. You're able to benefit from massive economies of scale. You have to stop guessing capacity. You can increase your speed and agility. You stop spending money on running data centers. You go global in minutes. So for people taking the exam, you must know these terms. And this is, I think, one of the really big takeaways with certification material, is that maybe you understand it in a slightly different way or would say it in a different way. It's important to know the terminology that the cloud vendor uses and copy that terminology so that when you see it on an exam, you get yourself tripped up. Okay, let's talk about the introduction to Amazon Web Services. What is a web service? Well, it's a piece of software that makes itself available over the internet and uses standardized formats such as XML or JavaScript object notation, JSON, for the request and the response of an application programming interface or API. We got client, internet, web service, right? We have all these things inside, going back and forth. But in general, you're taking some kind of data and you're sending it to some other location and getting back a response. What is AWS? It's a secure cloud platform that gives you a broad set of cloud-based products. You have on-demand resources like compute, storage, network, database. You also have the flexibility, right? You can just use what you need, and you can pay for the services that you need, but only for as long as you need them, and you don't have to get a huge bundle of services, right? You just get the thing you care about. So what are the categories of AWS services? Well, there's a lot. There are analytics, cost management, Internet of Things, networking and content delivery, application integration, customer engagement, machine learning, robotics, AR and VR, databases, management and governance, satellite, blockchain, developer tools, media services, security, identity and compliance, business applications, end user computing, migration and transfer, storage, compute, game technology, mobile. So what's a simple solution look like? Well, let's say you're building a database application. Customers would potentially send that data to EC2, and then that service is really in the compute category. And then you would go and store that data, let's say, inside of the Amazon storage system. And then you could use also a non-relational database like DynamoDB to power the application. So in general, the idea is that you can use all the different resources and build them together in a building block. As well, a thing to be aware of is that you have to choose the right service depending on what your requirements are. So for example, what is EC2 good for? Well, you can have complete control over your AWS computing resources. For AWS Lambda, you can run code and not manage or provision servers. Beanstalk allows you to create a service that deploys, manages, and scales web applications. Also, Lightsail is a pretty interesting service. It allows you to do basically content management or lightweight, simple web apps. AWS Batch, you can run thousands of batch workloads. This is really helpful for machine learning. I've used it for that. There's Outposts. You can run infrastructure on your own data center, which is pretty cool. Elastic Container Service or Amazon ECS, Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service, or AWS Fargate. You can do containers and microservices, and they handle some of the things that are really annoying about managing a Kubernetes service. There's also VMware Cloud on AWS, so you can have an on-premise server virtualization platform that you can migrate to AWS. So what are some of the services we're going to cover? In terms of compute services, there's let's just make a list. There's Amazon EC2, there's AWS Lambda, there's AWS Elastic Beanstalk, there's EC2 Auto Scaling, ECS, EKS, ECR, and Fargate. And this is an important thing that I would make sure you have memorized, is this list of compute services. It comes up over and over again, and know which one does what. Security, identity, and compliance services, we got AWS IAM, Amazon Incognito, AWS Shield, AWS Artifact, AWS KMS. Storage services, we have Amazon S3, Amazon S3 Glacier, Amazon EFS, Amazon EBS. Database services, we have Amazon RDS, Amazon DynamoDB, Amazon Redshift, Amazon Aurora. Networking and content delivery service, Amazon VPC, Amazon Route 53, Amazon CloudFront, Elastic Load Balancing. For management and governance, a huge topic right now, we have the Trusted Advisor, we have CloudWatch, we have CloudTrail, well-architected tool, auto scaling, command line interface, config, management console, organization. And then for cost management, we have cost and usage reporting, budgets, and cost explorer. All right, so what are the 3 ways that you can interact with AWS? The first one is the console itself, and this allows you to really click buttons and launch services. There's also the command line interface, which I'm a huge fan of, and you can see that when you launch AWS Cloud Shell, and it's very simple to control things. Now, you can also download that CLI on your own machine, so you can run it on Linux, Mac, and Windows. I personally would recommend you run it inside of the AWS platform using AWS Cloud Shell. There's also SDKs. So the SDK allows you to control and programmatically automate AWS from languages like Java, Python. There's also Go, C#. There's a lot of languages that are available to you if you want to develop software on top of the Amazon platform. Okay, takeaways. AWS is a secure cloud platform that offers a broad set of global cloud-based products. There's many categories. We went through a bunch of those. There's services based on your business and technology goals, and there's 3 ways to interact with those services. All right, let's keep going, and let's move into the Cloud Adoption Framework, or AWS CAF. So in general, you'll hear this as like kind of a consulting term, but a cloud adoption journey is really unique to an organization. And so the business and the technology people have to be working together. When I've seen problems moving to the cloud, crop their head up, it's really because there's a mismatch between the business people want one thing and the technology people want another, and then there's some kind of a problem. So what this framework does is it gives like a best practice, perspective about, okay, here's what we've noticed that is a great way to get started, and it builds them out. And so it's organized into 6 perspectives, and these perspectives contain a set of capabilities. So let's start with focus on the business capabilities. So this would be business, people, and governance. And we also want to focus on the technical capabilities, the platform, the security, and the operations. All right, so what is the business perspective? Well, the first thing I would recommend is you must ensure that IT is aligned with the business needs and that IT investments can be traced to business results. And so this is really a problem for many organizations, is they're trying to set up the cloud computing and then they don't know exactly the alignment between IT and business. But one of the ways you can do this is IT finance, IT strategy, business realization, business risk management. The people perspective is another one. You have to prioritize training, staffing, organization changes to build an organization. So this is something I see quite a bit even today, is that many places that want to either teach cloud computing, use cloud computing, it's this organizational change that becomes the problem, is that you have to dedicate the time to train everybody in your organization so that they can feel like they're ready to move on to cloud computing. So what this means is that you need to have resource management, incentive management, career management, training management, organizational change management. So in a nutshell, if you don't give people a reason to learn this technology, they're just not going to learn it. So governance perspective, this is another one that comes up, is that you have to ensure that the skills and processes align with IT strategy. So for example, in governance, it would be portfolio management, program and project management, business performance measurement, licensing management. These are all things that are important to be aware of. And then platform perspective, and basically the IT systems and the relationships, they have to work together with the business. So, how much compute do you need to provision? What about the networking, with the storage, database provisioning, systems and solutions architecture, and application development? So those are all the components of what would be in a platform that you're building out. Security is one of the biggest ones that you'll hear about a lot because there's so many problems with cybersecurity. Is identity and access management, or the principle of least privilege. Are you giving people just what they need? Detective control, infrastructure security, data protection. Is that data encrypted at rest and in transit? Incident response. Are you aware of when there's some kind of a problem? And then the operations perspective is the day-to-day things that you're doing when you're building out infrastructure quarter to quarter, year to year. So service monitoring, application performance monitoring, resource inventory, release management, change management, reporting analytics, business continuity, disaster recovery, IT service catalog. These are all the things that take place when you're doing operations. Okay, so basically cloud adoption is not instantaneous. For organizations, you have to have a strategy and then execute that strategy. And a lot of it happens through organizational change management. The AWS CAF, or Cloud Adoption Framework, is basically the best way to implement this strategy in organization. And there's different areas of focus. I think it's a pretty sane and clear strategy, and it is really a good way to get started with thinking about AWS in your org. All right, so what are the wrap-ups? You should be able to define different types of cloud computing models. You should be able to describe the 6 advantages of cloud computing, recognize the main service categories and core services. If you don't know these, I would definitely recommend writing them down and review the cloud adoption framework. All right, so let's go ahead and move on here. I'm going to try to get one more module in today, which is economics and billing. And with economics and billing, this is a place that's really important to pay attention to when you're first getting started. And in particular, we're going to cover fundamentals of pricing, total cost of ownership, AWS Organizations, billing and cost management, and technical support. So how does it work? Well, we're basically going to make sure you understand the capabilities of the billing and economics. So fundamentals of pricing here, there's 3 fundamental drivers of cost with AWS. There's compute, which is hours a second, or in many cases, actually now it's actually minutes per second. And so basically, it varies by instance. It's for Linux only. You're able to get that granular billing. And then in storage, you're charged typically per the gigabyte, and then data transfer outbound is aggregated and charged. Inbound has no charge with some exceptions. And then you're charged by the gigabyte. So these are basically, it's compute, storage, and data transfer, and you're basically charged by use. So you pay for what you use. You also pay less when you reserve, and then you pay less when you use more. So these are really important components to be aware of when you're using cloud computing. And I think it's a really good thing to be aware of. And in particular, when you think about pay for what you use on premise, you're putting huge dollars down into a system. Think about buying a Maserati or Ferrari, right? Those are super expensive versus you rent it, and it's still going to be expensive, but it's much different than buying it all at once. That's really the concept with pay as you use. And you pay less when you reserve. I think this is probably the easiest way for an organization to lower their costs. That if I had to pick one thing that most organizations don't do, it's that they don't use reserved instances, and you can save up to 75% cost. And so I think this is something that I would recommend you take a look at if you're not doing this already in your organization. And you can basically do this by either doing some down payment, or in some cases you can just say, I promise I'll use these for some period of time, and then you don't actually have to pay the cost up front, and you pay less by using more. So basically, as you get more and more into using cloud services, there's actually lower costs from a usage perspective. So this is basically buying in bulk. And you pay even less when AWS grows. So basically, AWS is constantly lowering the prices, and in fact, which is very interesting in a way, because we have inflation, but AWS has the ability to lower the prices. And so AWS has lowered pricing 75 times from 2006 to 2019. And high performance resources will replace the current resources. So you're also getting additional performance benefits, even though you're paying a lower price. So custom pricing, you can also do, specific projects. Now the free tier is the best place that I would recommend you get started with, and you can do this for free for a year with new customers. You sign up for an AWS account, you learn a 10-minute tutorial, you start building with AWS. That's it. So definitely recommend playing around with the free tier. The services that don't have any charge are VPC, Elastic Beanstalk, auto scaling, CloudFormation, and IAM. Now they may trigger something that charges you, but you don't have to actually get charged for those services. So in a nutshell, there's no charge for inbound data. You pay for what you use. You stop and start any time. No long-term contracts. Some are free of the services, but others that you provision may not be free. For example, like physical machines, like bare metal, you're going to pay for those resources. All right, total cost of ownership, really important concept in IT. And again, traditional infrastructure, you got equipment, resources, contracts, cost. Those are all things that could be in the millions of dollars. AWS, you pay nothing up front. You can move quickly. Again, from a laptop, you could build an entire company. In fact, I've done this multiple times. I've built out an entire company just on my laptop, just cranking through, writing code and building a whole cloud-based infrastructure, where in the old days, it could take a year, right? And you get, 20 IT people and you're building out this infrastructure. You can just click buttons on your laptop. You can scale up and down. You can build a self-service infrastructure. So what is the total cost of ownership? It's an estimate that helps you identify the direct and indirect costs of a system. So why would you use it? The idea is to really think about when someone says, hey, it's cheaper to run our own services. I would definitely say no, because in most cases it is not cheaper, because you're not fully calculating in things like salary, loss, problems that come up with outages. And this allows you to build a realistic budget and build a business case to move things to the cloud. So what are these total cost of ownership things to think about? We've got server costs, and this is the server, the rack chassis, the power, the top of the rack. We've got software, so the operating system licensing, virtualization licensing, maintenance, the facilities costs, space, power, cooling, right? These are bills that you're going to have to pay. Storage costs, hardware, storage disks, SANs, fiber channel switches, storage administration costs, facility costs. We have network costs, right? So local area network, switches, load balancing, the actual admins that you're going to pay to run this, who are not cheap. They're very expensive. IT labor costs, right? These are really expensive in general when you're dealing with the physical data center. So that's really the concept of total cost of ownership. You could save up to 96% a year by moving your infrastructure to AWS. Your 3-year savings would be about $150,000. So let's say an on-prem system all in is $160,000. The equivalent on AWS would be $7,500. So that is matches with my experience as well, is that because there's such an expensive upfront cost with a physical data center, if you design your architecture correctly and you do things like use reserved instances, it's a fraction, right? It could be essentially, roughly 5%. So how would you calculate what it would cost you? You would use the AWS pricing calculator, estimate monthly costs, identify opportunities to reduce costs, model the solution. Basically, by doing pre-planning, you can actually figure out exactly what it would cost to move to the AWS cloud. So how do you do an estimate? You look at the estimate broken into 12 months, total upfront, total monthly. And also with the pricing calculator, you can break it up into groups of 4 or 5 as well. The other things to consider beyond just those calculations are the hard benefits. You're not spending time doing things where you're not an expert. That's reducing spending and time on operations. The soft benefits is you're able to move much more quickly by using cloud computing. And there's some case studies of different organizations. I'll just skip through and just talk about another service called AWS Organizations. Now, an organization is a hierarchical structure that allows you to create things like an OU, which is organizational unit, and inside you can have accounts. So you can have accounts that have multiple accounts underneath them. And in general, the reason for doing this is you can do policy-based account management. You can also do group-based account management. You can have APIs. You can consolidate billing. With organizations, you can control IAM. You can also control service control policies. How do you set it up? You just go create an organization, create the units, create a policy, and then test it out. So it's a lot like Active Directory, which at one time was a really big IT paradigm. What are the limits of AWS Organizations? Well, you can have one root, you can have 1,000 OUs, you can have 1,000 policies, and there could be 20 invitations set per day. And the member accounts you can create concurrently. There's 5 at a time. And you can have an unlimited number of entities attached to a policy. So how would you access an organization? It would be a console, CLI, SDK, or HTTP interface. Okay, let's talk about billing and cost management here. So there's a dashboard, and that's probably one of the best places to start if you just are getting started with AWS. Make sure you look at the billing dashboard. There's so many people I've worked with in the last several years that got started with AWS, they didn't look at the billing dashboard. All of a sudden, they get a $3,000 bill because something was running. It's similar, though, if you go to your backyard and you accidentally leave the hose on, you can get a huge water bill. It's the same concept. And so you want to look at the meter, which is the billing and cost management. So some tools that will really help you out, and this is another one I would recommend, is setting up a budget. We'll talk about that, cost and usage report, and also Cost Explorer. So in a nutshell, the AWS Marketplace charges, AWS Service charges, these are all things you see in the monthly bill, but you can break it out by the Cost Explorer, which is really handy. It'll tell you, for example, you're spending a lot of money on EC2. Oh, why am I doing this? Let me dig into it. Or RDS, the Relational Database Service. The forecasting and track cost feature is a great way to figure out what's happening. So you can it'll forecast what you probably will spend. And then you can go ahead as well and get a billing alert, which is something I'd recommend you start off with. So maybe the final thing is that, in terms of a billing dashboard, there's a breakdown. It breaks down by cost, and you can play with that yourself. Now, technical support, this is one of the things that I think is also not utilized in many organizations is the AWS support. I would highly recommend it. They've got support plans. And support is provided for experimenting, production use, and business critical. So first up, let's talk about a TAM, or Technical Account Manager. And we'll also talk about Trusted Advisor and Support Concierge. So the basic support basically is dashboards, right? You don't get anything. The developer support means that you get some support for early features. Business support is customers that run production workloads. Enterprise support, it means that you get essentially real-time support. And I've used that in many organizations, and I would recommend it. So the case severity and response times would be, for basic, there's no case support. For developer plan, for normal, you've got 12 hours or 24 hours. For business plans, you could get urgent support in an hour or less. If it's low, you get 24 hours. Now, enterprise support, which again is what I would recommend for like Fortune 500 companies, you can get support within 15 minutes. They can actually plan things out with you, and in fact, they have somebody that's co-located or assigned to your organization. So, basically, in a nutshell, the big takeaway is that enterprise support, if you're a Fortune 500 company, is often a very good idea. So what did we cover? We talked about fundamentals of pricing, total cost of ownership, pricing calculator, billing calculator, and I think that's a good place to stop right now. So I'm going to just stop here and talk a little bit more about this. So in a nutshell, I would recommend, if you are wanting to be an expert on AWS, is start off with this Cloud Practitioner certification. And it really is fairly straightforward. And fortunately for you, I'm going to cover a little bit of it each week. And so we should be able to get through this material in the next few weeks. And I'll talk to you a little bit about studying for the exam as well. If something crops up where there's a demo that makes sense, I'll also go through and demo it out as well. All right. Well, thank you for attending today. I will be here again next Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'll continue to do 52 weeks of AWS. All right. Talk to everybody later.